This episode of Star Wars in a Galaxy was recorded and produced during the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strikes. Without the labor of the actors currently on strike, the stories being covered here wouldn't exist. Thank you, and enjoy this episode of In a Galaxy.
Hello there. Welcome back to Star Wars in a Galaxy, watching all the Star Wars we can get our hands on. I'm Jacob.
I'm Eli.
And today we are starting season number 15 of our show. This is episode 116. We are going to be continuing our chronological rewatch of every piece of Star Wars media we can find. And we are doing that today with the first 40 minutes of Solo, a Star Wars story. This is the first time, Eli, you said in about 18 months that we are covering a Star Wars movie, and it is going to be another couple of years before we do one after this. So let's savor this while we can, Eli. Let's savor this while we can.
Absolutely. Let's savor this while we can. It feels so good to be covering a live action Star Wars film again. To be covering a live action Star Wars again, period. Don't get me wrong. I love animation. I love the video games. I don't have anything against them, but there is something about live action that is just so fun to cover, and especially with a film like Solo, which is, I think it's an interesting film specifically for Star Wars because everybody's got an opinion about it, and no two opinions are quite the same about this movie.
Yeah, I think this movie represents, if we remember when it came out, and inferring from that, when it was produced, when it was thought out, it represents a really interesting moment in time for Star Wars because it kind of represents almost this alternate reality that we could have gotten where the headlining acts of Star Wars are anthology movies rather than TV shows. And it kind of feels, looking back on it, can't use the hindsight glasses too much necessarily, but it does feel like such a departure from what we now have. And I'm really looking forward to talking about that and seeing what you have to say, Eli, because I think you're a bit more of a Solo proponent than I am. I think as we will uncover.
Well, we'll see.
As your opinion, because
I love this. I love this movie as I love things about all Star Wars movies, but I will not be afraid to admit that this is in the bottom half of my Star Wars rankings. And it's there for a reason. Don't get me wrong, I like a lot of things about this movie. My review of, for example, this first 40-minute chunk is almost like has a lot of positives to it. But there are a few things in there that I'm still not thrilled about with this story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last time I checked, I thought you were a bit higher on it than maybe you are. So yeah. We'll get into that.
No, I mean, it's interesting because we're just coming off of Fallen Order, but more specifically Bad Batch, which is something I loved. Fallen Order, which is something I very much liked and got better for me when we rewatched it. Solo is getting better for me, but it's still kind of an outlier. And then we're gonna go, and then next season is Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is one of my favorite things that Star Wars has done in the Disney era ever. So so Solo is a little bit of a weird one because I feel like everybody has their opinions. I know a lot of people, friend of the show, Diaz, loves this movie a lot more than most. There are a lot of people, that big campaign hashtag make Solo 2 happen. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are proponents of this movie. This movie, despite being a box office flop, at least for Star Wars, has gotten continuations in the Kira trilogy of comics, the Crimson Dawn trilogy of comics by Charles Soule, all of which I have read, and they're phenomenal. And in other ways that I'm sure I'll mention in this episode, they have not gotten expanded upon like I would have liked them to. But and enough talk. I'll do the summary for this episode. Why not?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. In the first 40 minutes of Solo, a Star Wars story, we open on the shipbuilding world of Corellia. Corellia is a world in the deep core, which the Empire uses the technical workers and pilots on the planet to construct their capital ships. The opening text reveals that the Empire has its place on Corellia, but so do local crime syndicates like the White Worms, run by the Grindelid crime boss Lady Proxima, who takes in orphans and has them work for her in exchange for food. In exchange for food, medicine, and hyperfuel. We see one of Proxima's workers, a young orphan man named Han, boost a speeder from some guys he was trying to make a deal with. He gets back to Proxima. He gets back to the den of the White Worms, and it's revealed that he got a container of coaxium, a powerful hyperfuel, that is worth probably around 700-800 credits. And he and his girlfriend named Kira, who's also an orphan taken in by the White Worms, are going to use the coaxium to escape Corellia, buy a ship, and go get a better life for themselves. Unfortunately, Han is brought before Lady Proxima, and she demands to know where her money is and where her and about the deal. Han decides to rebel against her and throws a rock against one of the walls, shattering it, revealing light into the den of the White Worms, which causes Proxima to sink back underwater. He and Kira then use the opportunity to escape on a speeder that Han stole. Their escape goes pretty well, all things considered. They actually managed to get into a line to escape Corellia, and they managed to bribe the Imperial officer on the scene with that coaxium to let them through. But unfortunately, Proxima's head enforcer Moloch manages to capture Kira at the last second. Han is separated from Kira, and having nothing and wanting to become a pilot by any means possible to go back for Kira. Han decides to join the Empire because of an advert he saw. He meets with Imperial recruiting officer Fraud Munbrin, who asks what Han's name is and who his people are. Han doesn't have a people. He's been an orphan for as long as he can remember. Not for as long as he can remember, for quite a while now. His family is long gone. So Munbrin opts to give him the name Solo, and promises that that he will have Han flying in no time. We cut 3 years later to see Han flying through the air on the planet of Mimban, where the Empire seeks to neutralize the Mimbanese, whose planet they have invaded as a colonialist force, and they're trying to conquer for the Emperor. Han realizes that there are a few mercenaries who have infiltrated the army, and named Tobias Beckett, Val, and Rio Durant. And before he threatens to reveal who they really are to the Empire, but before he can manage to do that, they try to apprehend that they fake him being apprehended for trying to desert, which he was not trying to do. He gets thrown into a pit with a beast that hasn't eaten in 3 days. This beast is a Wookiee named Chewbacca. He and Chewbacca manages to speak some Shriwook to Chewbacca, and they escape on the AT hauler that Beckett and his crew stole. They're convinced to take them aboard because of the because of the strength that a Wookiee can provide for the team. They prepare for the heist with forming relationships and bonds with Tobias Beckett, Val, and Rio Durant. The time comes for the heist, which is that they're going on, which is a heist of a train on the icy planet of Vandor. Things are going good for them. They're stopping the Empire's range troopers. They're getting the coaxium, which is revealed to be what they're taking. And all is going well until a group of marauders called the Cloud Riders and their leader Enfys Nest show up and sabotage the mission, forcing Han to jettison the coaxium, causing it to drop and explode into a mountain. Val and Rio also die in the heist when it goes wrong by various means. After the heist goes wrong, Han, Chewbacca, and Beckett are walking through on the snowy mountains of ice, snowy mountains of Vandor, and Beckett abruptly turns and punches Han in the face, revealing that he wasn't just getting the coaxium for himself. He was on a mission from one of the major crime syndicates of the galaxy, Crimson Dawn. And now they're in huge trouble with Crimson Dawn because they were supposed to get them that coaxium, great show. They were supposed to get them that coaxium, and now they're short 100 keys. All right, we got a lot to go through with this one.
Eli,
actually, yeah.
I think I want to commend you. I think that was the most detailed and exhaustive summary that we've ever had on this podcast. I think that takes the cake.
Thanks.
Where do you want to start here? I guess one thing I noticed about the intro to Solo, I don't know if we've ever, besides Solo, seen an actual shot of a location, a shot that's in the movie or the TV show, simultaneously showing an artificial logo or title.
The title, yeah.
I just thought that was interesting. What do you make of that?
We'll talk about this opening. I want to talk about this just opening generally, because it's a controversial and interesting way of opening this movie. First of all, it's so fantastic to see a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away again. That's where we got this show's name from. It's so great to see it again. Honestly, I just love that we're seeing it again. Then we get what I call the scroll, which is opening text in the same font that a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away is used in, to provide a little bit of context for what we're going into. This is, of course, as opposed to Rogue One, which has zero crawl, has zero opening details. It literally just cuts to Lamu, which is the first planet in the film.
It was a light crawl.
So, but this is an interesting happy medium between the two. Now, here's my question for you, and I have my answers for this.
Okay. For
Solo and Rogue One, in terms of crawls, in terms of starting stuff, and by the way, since this time, Kathleen Kennedy says 4 new Star Wars films, even though they will not be connected to the main Skywalker saga, even though the Skywalker saga has ended for now, that crawls will be making a return.
So that's interesting.
That the new Jedi Order movie will have a crawl. That James Mangold's beginning of the Jedi movie will have a crawl. I assume that also means that Dave Filoni's end of the Grogu saga movie will have a crawl. I mean, we saw Ahsoka had a crawl, so you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cool to see. It's cool to see these early anthology movies, experiment with different ways of starting it out. I mean, The Crawl is so iconic that I think it was an interesting choice to leave that for the main saga trilogy movies when they were making this one. I don't really have a strong opinion about it coming back. I think that it definitely does. It does its job by them experimenting with how they introduce the movie, of is signaling that we're getting something very different, setting up different expectations. Did a different way of starting it off. I think I like the way they did it here. I think I prefer the Rogue One style. I don't
Just
think that the
no
movie
crawl at all.
necessarily,
Just complete cut.
yeah, I don't think that it necessarily needs a lot of introduction. I mean, maybe that's down to I personally prefer Rogue One. I think it's a better executed movie. So maybe if the roles or the positions were reversed, I would be saying the other thing. I don't know, but
So, in a shock to everyone, I'm going to disagree with you.
yes,
My thing is, I want
shocker.
every Star Wars movie to have a crawl.
Yeah,
I think a crawl is for me fundamental to a Star Wars movie. It's not like it's a terrible movie without a crawl. No, I don't think that. But would I have liked a full crawl for Rogue One and Solo? Yes, I would have. I just like that. Like again, it ties it back into the serial past, the Flash Gordon past, the 1930s serial, like where you need that crawl because you might have missed what happened in the last episode, so you need to be caught up.
yeah.
So that you know what happens in this episode. Um, uh,
I think it's certainly helpful. Yeah, it
yeah,
definitely is.
but I do think that like here's the thing. I will say this. I think this half crawl is okay. I don't love it. I don't hate it. It's fine. If Rogue One had this, it would be fine. Um, like obviously I want as many of them to have full crawls as possible, but
What do you, for you, is the full crawl? Is your feeling about that functional? Is it functional? Is it stylistic, or is it symbolic? Because for me, I feel like the fact that they chose to not go with the crawl for these early anthology movies and do something else is more symbolic than
it's
anything
kind
else,
of actually it's kind of actually a mixture of all three. It's functional because Star Wars tends to jump timelines and jump like in the galaxy a lot, and
Yeah,
newer
absolutely.
viewers might be a little confused as they were at the end of this movie for a reason we will talk about near the end of this season.
Yeah.
Um,
He who shall not be
it's
named.
it's stylistic because it's for me the stylistic and symbolic reasons are the same. It's a fucking Star Wars movie. This is how we do it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's kind of a little bit of all three. But uh, but I want to read this crawl just because, yeah. It
The
is a
edification
lawless
of the
time.
people.
It is a lawless time. Crime syndicates compete for resources, food, medicine, and hyperfuel. On the shipbuilding planet of Corellia, the foul Lady Proxima forces runaways into a life of crime in exchange for shelter and protection. On these mean streets, a young man fights for survival, but yearns to fly among the stars. Again, even like disregarding like the functional like the function of a crawl or a half crawl or whatever you want to call this. Like even in terms of just crawls and stuff, like this is okay. Like that is actually this kind of this like I think it fully encapsulates my feeling on Solo. Is that it's good enough. There's some good stuff in here. There's some stuff I don't love. It is good enough. One of the things I appreciate most is that is right off the get go. There are a few things that are capitalized, and you know that the capitalizations are usually tend to be pretty important things
Usually
for
a
the
pretty big deal.
characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things they capitalize is hyperfuel, which I think is really important because hyperfuel coaxium does play a role in every major event of this film.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's really smart to capitalize it there. And I also like just the idea that the MacGuffin in this film is like hyperfuel. Like it just makes sense for a Han Solo film. Like
Yeah, of course.
who's a character that involves fast ships and jumping to hyperspace a lot to
Flying through
involve
the stars.
flying through the stars. Like it there's only one thing in this film to me that really feels out of place in this film. And we'll talk about that in the final episode of this season. Um, uh, uh, but it's yeah, and it also my notes. I was also just talking in my notes about the idea that I wanted to throw to you because it's an interesting. This is one of my most interesting things about this movie, and I think that I'd love to see this in other Star Wars media. I think we get it a little bit in Survivor too, but I think Solo does the best job of this, which is the Empire is in this movie, but they're kind of in the background.
Yeah, they are. I think
Like nobody really cares about the Empire in this movie. Like after Minbin, nobody really cares about the Empire. Like it gets to the point where that when you see in the Maelstrom on Kessel, you see that Imperial Star Destroyer, and you start hearing like the Empire Strikes Back callouts in the music. You're like, oh yeah, the Empire's in this thing.
yeah, I think I mean, it's like they say in the crawl. It's a lawless time. This is the reign of the Empire, but this is not necessarily the direct reign of the Empire. I could have said that better, but you know what I mean. Like,
yeah, no,
that was something that
I
I wrote in my notes too. It's very interesting, I think, for the world building. You know that this is not the Empire in this era. This is not the rise of the Empire or the early Empire, early mid-Empire era. This is not how we see it in the Bad Batch. This is not how we see it even in Kenobi to an extent.
In Kenobi, in Andor,
yeah, in Andor, this is the periphery. This is kind of,
which is weird because Corellia is in the core, but
yeah, it's incredibly strange. It's incredibly strange to me as well. Like shouldn't this is an incredibly important world for the Empire? Shouldn't this be like on lockdown? But I think, this is the underworld. This is like these are the systems that the Empire essentially inherits and keeps them in place.
Yeah.
In order for Palpatine to maintain his own power and his own power base, on the surface. And obviously the Empire's power is incredibly deep rooted. But I think it's interesting, and I think continuity wise, it doesn't quite make sense. It doesn't quite make sense. Just because we're in the deep core,
to suspend disbelief.
Or the core. Yeah, but I am willing to suspend disbelief, and kind of, I think it just goes to show how it's a commentary on different types of totalitarianism.
Yeah.
I think, in Andor, we kind of see that very Stalinistic, vision, where the state is all encompassing. There's this great terror, this kind of crushing silence that is forcing everyone into complicity, and that everyone is so afraid, everyone is turning on each other. And then on the other hand, this almost seems like more of a little bit more of a fascist, Third Reich style, where the totalitarian government exists in this vision, or in this portrayal of the Empire in this instance, but it coexists, and it uses to its advantage, pre-existing, maybe less than ethical, and it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison, but it uses pre-existing capitalist bases of power, bases of wealth, and incorporates that into this almost semi-corporate structure. And I think maybe that's just a function of, this is a giant galaxy, the Empire doesn't necessarily have to just be one or the other.
Yeah, and despite like, yeah, and it's, of course, it's different based on what part of the galaxy you're in, and how the citizens react to the Empire.
Yeah.
Like Vandor, there doesn't really seem to be much going on Vandor.
Yeah.
For example. So like the only Imperial presence we see on Vandor is those range troopers, and
Yeah.
they're a joke. And they're a joke. Nobody cares about that mission. No one. The mission is going completely fine until Enfys Nest shows up. We got like one shot of the range troopers shooting, and then Han and Beckett and Chewbacca shoot him down, and just nobody cares. I mean, I care about the range troopers more than Han and Beckett and Chewbacca do. I mean, that's because they provide me with assists and protection up. But I was gonna make that joke later on. But
I didn't even see it coming. I'm not gonna lie. I should have seen that one coming. Should have seen that one coming.
Range Trooper is one of those great proportional Galaxy of Heroes, like disproportionate Galaxy of Heroes characters, where the amount you see them in the actual Star Wars and like the usefulness they have are completely out of whack.
Yeah,
you see them
absolutely.
for like a minute in this movie, and like they're in a main part of an Imperial Trooper squad in Galaxy Heroes.
No game is safe from ludonarrative dissonance at times.
Absolutely not.
Safe.
No. Colonel Stark, who's a character that we never actually see in a movie, is pivotal. Is pivotal to the troopers.
Yeah. Where does he even come from?
Stark is so he's operating one of the AT-ATs on Hoth. We just never see him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah, back to your original question, because I didn't want to answer this. I hate it. I hate the solo crawl incorporated into the landscape. I don't like it.
Yeah. I think it was definitely a choice. I think in hindsight, with everything having gone the way it has, in terms of what movies have we seen come to fruition, what TV shows, I think it feels very jarring. I can see I could see a potential path where, this was the new crawl, this was going to be the consistent creative choice that they went for with these anthology movies. But I guess, obviously we'll never know. Yeah.
But I'm sorry,
I didn't particularly like it either. Yeah. It is a bit jarring.
I don't like it very much. I really don't. And Solo is a movie that, again, most of the decisions I do like. I will also add. Let's jump into this stuff. Actually, I want to get into a little bit like the crawl stuff. God damn it! The Adventures of Han, which is that theme that plays over the dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
So if you don't know that, for people who don't know, that was written by John Williams.
Yeah, but he didn't compose all this movie. He only composed that.
He only composed that theme, and John Powell's for the rest of this movie. Yeah. I think this film's music, this film's score, is highly underrated.
Yeah, I think it's a great score. I think it's not necessarily one that sticks in my mind incredibly well among Star Wars scores, but I mean, you have a lot of tough acts to follow, so that's not necessarily an indictment of it.
I freaking love, we'll talk about this later, the Cloud Rider motif.
Yeah, the Cloud Rider motif is fantastic.
Love it.
I just think
no notes.
No.
It's
I like, just think sorry, go ahead.
It is one of the best Star Wars themes not written by John Williams.
Yeah,
like
maybe.
It's up there with The Mandalorian and the Dark Troopers and
it's
like
a good one.
the Inquisitors in Kenobi.
I will say, I think that and this is something I'll get to more later. I think that the music it's good. It's a very competently scored movie, but I do think it just veers a little bit too much into that Disney ride feeling, just exciting romp music. And I do think that does undercut the weight of some of what they're trying to portray.
Yes, because let me just do this. I don't mean this mostly. Yes, because how dare Solo?
Just go for it.
Because how dare Solo be an exciting romp? That's not at all what this film is.
Fair enough. I mean,
exciting romp is the best description of Solo I've ever heard.
Well, I think, and I don't think that's a problem. I do think that this movie maybe once we bring up some of these things, I can get into this more. But I will say, I think this movie suffers from a little bit of tonal whiplash, maybe, and it doesn't quite find its identity necessarily.
An interesting take. I'm not sure.
In terms of,
Yeah.
I just think, on the one hand, you've got these really exciting, you've got these exciting chase scenes. It's very high energy. It's pretty lighthearted, a lot of this, but at the same time, you've got all of a sudden that hard left turn into Val dying, getting separated from Kira, these really fast, sharp turns between different tones, and just the way that it transitions into something really serious and back out of it again really quickly over and over again throughout the movie. I think I just think it doesn't quite work
I
for
get
me.
it. And we also have to address the elephant in the room, which I didn't actually write about at all in my notes, just because I feel like I went into writing these notes with the assumption that it was kind of already there.
Yeah.
We have to talk a little bit about the behind the scenes of Solo, just to get it out of the way. This movie behind the scenes was a fucking mess.
Yeah.
Originally, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, directors of 21 Jump Street and the Lego Movie, among others, were attached to direct this film. They were asked to leave by Kathleen Kennedy after it became clear that their vision for the film was not what Lucasfilm wanted for this film. They left, I think, a decent way through production, but production wasn't over. I think it was probably like mid-production. Again, I'm getting this from the stuff we know, and of course, Disney hired Ron Howard, Lucasfilm alum, and very trusted director, to reshoot a lot of the film and finish it out. But still a lot of stuff that Lord and Miller did on the film is still in the film. And obviously they're working with the same actors, except for Dryden Voss in Lord Miller's cut was going to be played by the late Michael K. Williams. But Williams was unavailable for the reshoots, so they instead replaced Williams with Paul Bettany. But so yeah, it's there are some dissonances in the movie, and I think others were like, I'm very bad at recognizing behind the scenes stuff. I know that for a fact. I think it's a strength of mine and a weakness, honestly. Like, I think it can do good stuff for me in terms of like analyzing stories, and bad stuff. But there are some moments, especially there's a scene, like a sequence. I think in like the first 20 minutes of the next episode that we'll be talking about, like the first half of the next episode, there's some stuff where you could see like their conversations that feel a little wonky.
Yeah.
And the tonal shifts that you're describing may well be a symptom of the fact that this movie went through extensive reshoots. Not like, because all movies go through reshoots to a certain extent, but this one went through reshoots.
Yeah, and I think I'm not really sure. I'm not honestly. I'm not as familiar with you are as the process and the details of how the reshoots played out, or why, so what was affected, what wasn't, and specifically what these creative differences were.
And
so
I don't really know.
say,
I don't really know.
Yeah, and I'm not going to try and speculate on something that I don't know. So I will just say, receiving this, regardless of how it came to be and what happened, that's all well and good. I don't know the details. I will say, receiving this as a movie, watching this, I think it just suffers from being, it has kind of, its identity feels like it's being pulled maybe in two different directions. Maybe, I think on the one hand, it's very fast, it's fast paced, it's a romp, it's bouncing around, it's pretty upbeat. But then I think it incorporates these moments, tropes, motifs that try to make the experience really, hard hitting and emotionally visceral. Val, the transition to Mimban, the separation with the separation from Kira, obviously, And I think it doesn't necessarily, because of just the pacing of the movie and the overall energy that it's set within, it doesn't necessarily do justice to those moments. It kind of cheapens them. And then those moments also kind of make the story just feel a little bit rockier and more jarring, I think, as a viewer. I think for example, I would say, you know, we have the transition to Mimbong, which I think on the one hand it's awesome, you know. I think it's
the transition to Mimbun for me, and I let's can we save this until we like get to this, because we still need to
we
get
can
to
save
like
this,
the
yeah.
actual plot of this movie.
Yeah.
What am I gonna say? I love the intro. The intro with Han sparking up that speeder. I love it so much. I think it's an energetic and interesting start to this. I will say, one of the first things that Han does once he boosts the speeder is he puts his lucky charm up on the speeder, the dice.
Yes.
I'm so bothered by those dice.
Why?
Because they're there. What do they do in this film? Nothing. They're his lucky dice. Like, they made a big deal about, like you can see them in A New Hope. They made a big deal about them in The Last Jedi, because of Ben like picking them up and then fading away via Luke's Force protection. Solo was 6 months after this. We saw the dice with Han in the trailers constantly, and he puts them up, and they're just kind of there. Like, they're lucky for a reason, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of torn on this one. You know, on the one hand,
it feels like an unfired Chekhov's gun.
I think on the one hand, I think it definitely couldn't have hurt to maybe give it some more symbolic meaning. On the other hand, not everything has to have that necessarily. You know, I do think that one of the nice things about the anthology movies, and one thing that I think this new generation of Star Wars projects is doing very well, is including a lot of small little nods and tie-ins to things that came before, even if they're not directly crucial to the story. I think maybe this was an attempt at doing something like that, and I think that maybe it just wasn't necessarily well executed, because dice, I really didn't know that the dice existed before this movie, you know? So it feels like it was kind of retroactively giving something that no one really noticed in the original movies more importance than it necessarily needs to have.
Well, not really even more importance, because they don't have any importance.
Not importance, just
more screen time, more focus.
Just screen time, just more just more screen time. I will say importance in the narrative, just because it has that by virtue of being on screen and being something that being something that they intentionally include, you know? It has intention, it has more intention behind it. I'll say that.
I'm not saying that everything needs a backstory. I'm absolutely not saying
I'm not trying to say that you are.
No, I know.
For the record.
What I am saying, I was gonna say, is this movie gives the pistol a backstory, gives the sidekick a backstory. Like, it's doing it for everything else. Why is it not doing it for the? Why is it just saying, "Oh yeah," and the dice are there?
I would also push really hard to say, why does everything need a backstory? You know, why does the pistol need a backstory? Why do we need this scene? Why do we need this scene where he gets the name Solo? That's such a terrible scene to me. I'm not gonna lie.
We'll talk about Solo when it happens. The pistol, I will just quickly say, like, I think I actually like the pistol, because how does Han get it? What does the pistol mean? It's a pistol that that Beckett puts together in 2 seconds and throws to him. It gets its own like little second of glory, and that's it. It's just a gun.
Yeah.
Like, we know it, but it's just a gun.
Yeah, possibly. Pretty much.
What am I gonna say? Oh yeah. I didn't realize this until I was doing research for Epic Confrontations about this, but did you notice that there was a game of sabacc going between two kids in the hallways of the Den of the White Worms, where one accused the other of cheating? cheating with a card up his sleeve, basically.
No. That
It's
okay,
a
yeah, no.
it's a foreshadowing of Han and Lando's game later in this film.
I mean, that's how he maybe that's how he learned, maybe that was the thing that they did, who knows.
It's really that extra detail is something like they didn't have to do that, but they absolutely did.
Yeah.
I will say this. I remember specifically going into this movie. I'm like, is there going to be any romantic tension between Han and Kira? And then the first time we see Kira, she kisses Han straight on the mouth. I'm like, okay, that answers that question. I want to get this out of the way because this is one of the most controversial things about this movie, and I want to talk about this. It's been a point of contention in a lot of the fan base on recast just in general because you don't want to do a full imitation of the character, like of the actor, but you also want to make sure to embody the character, which I think Ehrenreich does stupendously.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult balance to strike. And it's even more difficult now that we've entered this era of deep fakes and all kinds of crazy
and AI
crap that I don't
generation and
even
stuff like that.
I don't even
But like,
yeah.
but
I mean, I think you gotta let the actors and actresses to some extent just make these characters their own, And I think I was too harsh on Alden Ehrenreich when I first saw this movie, and in the following years, I think that holding him to recreating such an iconic and unique portrayal the way that Harrison Ford did, it's not going to happen. And I honestly think he does a good job. He does a great job with the hand that he's dealt, which is not an easy hand whatsoever. Being the first person recast as such a well-known iconic character that's kind of almost synonymous. Not the first person.
Ewan McGregor would have some words with you.
I meant Han Solo in specific, but I mean, I think it's very different. It's a very different thing. I don't think that those two situations are at all equivalent for a number of reasons. But I think that he was dealt a very difficult hand, a challenging hand.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Han Solo as a character, I can't think of many more characters that are maybe quite a few in Star Wars, but he's on that top level in terms of characters who are synonymous with actors, Princess Leia, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo. Like
I think Harrison has two of them. I think Harrison has two of them with Indiana Jones.
I think you're absolutely right. He absolutely does.
Though honestly, I think Indiana Jones is actually more of a Harrison self-insert than Han is, actually. Evidented by, the fact that we've recast Han Solo and we haven't recast Indiana. Well, actually, we have.
The fact that Harrison Ford is still interested in playing, he's not interested in playing Han Solo, and he is interested in playing Indiana Jones. Make it that.
Well, he's not interested in playing Indiana Jones anymore. Dial is his last.
Yeah, I mean, he was for a lot longer than he was Solo. That's all my point is.
That's true. That is very true. But like when he's dragged in front of Proxima and Proxima asked him, "Where's my money? Where's my coaxium?" And he goes, "What a night I had!" Like that, "What a night I had" was like so Harrison, and so like it embodied the spirit of that character. I remember just watching it like a few days ago when I was watching it again. I'm just like, God, I just had a giddy smile on my face because that's so Han. Like,
yeah, I think his portrayal here is delightful. I've really changed my mind. I think he does a fantastic job.
And the entire gag with Proxima, I have something that'll interest you. What is that?
Yeah,
it's a thermal detonator. No, it isn't. It's a rock. You made the clicking sword noise with your mouth.
Yeah, I mean the entire sequence with Han and Lady Proxima, the rock, everything. It's so hilariously silly and campy and completely unserious. I think in realizing that, I've realized how to enjoy this movie. In a sense, this scene really embodies that, and I think maybe you could say it's too much, but I think for what this movie is trying to do, I think it's acceptable, and it put a smile on my face. It did.
Yeah, I really like the I actually really like the line it straddles between the grit and the pulp specifically. I really like that. I like the fact that Han and Kira and all these other kids are de facto enslaved to a giant worm. I think
Yeah.
that's hilarious.
I mean, I think
Not
it's
the
an
slavery
example
part,
of
of course, but like, but the fact that their boss is a giant worm
yeah.
who's
I mean, I
scared
think
of the light.
it's a great example of you know, don't conflate necessarily the setting or the art direction with the overall direction of the movie, because this is a very gritty setting, world building where we understand what we're meant to understand, and at the same time it's pretty unserious in many ways.
It is, and it's fun. Uh, and the, uh, there's also that line I wrote this one down too. And the coaxium, they kept that too, but we learned a really valuable lesson here. We cannot trust those guys.
Yeah.
Like everything about Alden Ehrenreich's delivery is just like I ran away with my life. I think that's something. To me, that's a lot. Like the sarcastic wit, the like the sort of honor code, even though he's still a scoundrel. Like it's just clicking. Um, it's I would 100% love to see Alden Ehrenreich do Han again. Of course, in true Harrison Ford fashion. He was interviewed like this was about a year after Solo released when Star Wars was really getting kicked up in a big way with
Yeah.
Rise of Skywalker and with Mandalorian, and and they're like, "Have you seen any of them?" He's like, "No, I don't care."
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Fair enough.
fantastic job. And I know Harrison also likes Alden as Han. Like I know he's shown
He
his
doesn't have
support.
to.
What?
I just said, yeah, he doesn't have to.
Yeah, and I also think he just likes the acting, like just the acting of
Yeah.
Alden in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just me gushing about Alden Ehrenreich because I do think he's
Yeah.
fantastic in this movie.
Yeah, no, I've
And
changed my mind. I think he does
of
a good
course,
job.
of
I really
course,
do.
casting Han Solo in a Han Solo movie, it's a pretty important part of the movie. So
Yeah.
um,
So I mean, moving on, the
yeah.
speeder. Do we want to move on to the speeder chase, or do we have more to say about
I mean,
Lady
sure. If you
Proxima?
don't have anything else, yeah.
I don't know. I think the speeder chase, I think as well. I think it's very apparent that this is not necessarily. This is a romp. This is a romp of a movie,
Yeah.
Even in this situation, and I know it's early in the movie, but even in this speeder chase situation, it really doesn't feel like there's any stakes. I'm gonna be honest. It really doesn't feel like
Oh, it's I don't
anything
know.
is
I
at
feel like
risk here.
I mean,
Just the music,
the stakes are
the
lower. Don't get
acting.
me wrong, but like there's a the stakes are lower. Don't get me wrong, but like I feel like I felt that tension because Han and Kira really want to get out of there and like they're trying to get a better life for themselves.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
it's a I thought the action was directed insanely well. I thought that the like the gag that Han will later use, the move that Han will later use, but he uses here with the turning the speeder side like diagonally to
Yeah.
get through the alley. I think it was all very fun. It felt like classic Lucas action.
Yeah, it was very kind of campy, but in a more, I don't know. I don't want to say Marvel, but Marvel-esque way, where unlike the originals, I think it's not just camp, but the wisecracking never really stops,
Yeah,
It just keeps
absolutely.
coming. For better or for worse, it just keeps coming. And I think
Yeah.
I mean the gag, it is pretty funny, the gag that the speeder just straight up grinding to a halt, Wasn't
Yeah.
expecting that at first.
It's crazy. I will say I mourn this in this section specifically. I mourn for Han and Kira, specifically for Kira. I think that he and Leia are a better couple. Don't get me wrong, but Kira in so many ways. And I don't mean this like I'm mad at the writers for this, because I know that this can be said like in a way that you're mad at the writers. I don't mean that. I mean as like a character, Kira deserved better. Like, Kira got her Audi.
Yeah, she did. She did.
And
That's
knowing
fair.
what we know about her now from the new Crimson Climb novel that's out and from the Charles Soule trilogy, she's been through way too much for someone who was basically forced into it. Who was forced into it. She was sold as a slave or as an indentured servant. I don't exactly know what they called her, but as a slave to Crimson Dawn, and managed to work her way up to the ranks by doing some horrible shit. And once Han finds her again, which he will in the next episode that we watch, she is radically different from the Kira he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also just like Moloch, who's Proximus #2, having hounds. I love that. It's so that's like the grit and pulp. Like he's literally sending dogs after them. It's so like it's so ridiculous and so
maybe pulpy is a good word. Yeah,
it's pulpy, but it's also like it also feels legitimately scary. I will also just say before we get to the next part of this, the name of the officer who they bribe at the gate, because I know this because of course I do, is a fantastic Star Wars name. Her name is Falthina Sherist.
A most
Perfect.
Star Wars name indeed.
Yeah, it's a fantastic Star Wars name, and I love it. You got anything to say about the chase and going into Coronet Spaceport?
No, I mean, I think this is, I don't know. I kind of feel like there's some tonal whiplash here. It does feel quite jarring. I think, obviously it's meant to be sudden, and that's part of it, and that's the experience of Han and Kira, where they're about to be free. They're about to set off on this great adventure of freedom, and then it gets turned on its head instantly. But I think going from that then straight into the Han Solo scene where he gets his name, that doesn't really work for me. I feel like that undercuts going back too quick. I feel going back too quick to a very light, wisecracking tone. I feel like that just undercuts the importance of what actually happened to Han and how that affects him. And then I feel like through the rest of the movie, it feels to me like he's telling, not showing, the impact of his relationship with Kira, because we rush through that initially. That's just my opinion on how it all plays out.
Yeah, I think the separation is an interesting, like I understand why it doesn't pack a punch for you, but it works for me. I'll say it works for me.
Fair enough.
I feel the impact even if I understand where it comes from, which I do. Jacob, let's get to the elephant in the room.
Let's do it.
What's your name, son? Han. Han,
Ugh.
what? Who are your people? I'm alone. I don't have people. I'm alone. Han. Shut up. You will never.
Oh,
you don't catch me being negative a lot on the show. I don't like this. I hate it. It is one of the worst things I think that's happened under Disney Star Wars. And and everybody here knows how much of a proponent I am with what Disney has done and new Lucasfilm done with Star Wars, and how great I think they've stayed with George's vision, and adding new visions into this. I hate this.
Me too. On that, we finally agree on something wholeheartedly.
I know that good friend of the show, Alden Diaz, has created an explanation. Like he's analyzed this in this way, like the idea that like Solo was foisted on Han, like a lot of other things in his life. And he kind of needs to deal with that, like the way he just kind of deals with everything else in his life. and I completely understand where he's coming from with his analysis, and I completely understand why it works for him and works for other people who think that. I just don't. I just don't. I think it is. I've ranted so much about why I love Rey Skywalker, and this to me is the antithesis of that scene because it is not a character deciding their own destiny. It's somebody else deciding their destiny for them, and they're just kind of saying, "Yeah, okay, fine." By the way, this guy's name is motherfucking Drod Munbrin. His parents didn't do a good job naming him. Why the hell does he get to name somebody else?
I don't know. I just think it completely takes away kind of the campy charm, the little kind of allegorical humor of Han Solo's name in the originals, and it just throws that away for just a cheap gag that really doesn't need to be there. I don't think it fits.
It gets even worse when you realize that Lawrence Kasdan, who is a writer I greatly respect, pitched this movie with that.
I don't understand why this needed to be in the movie. I just don't. I
completely. I feel like, again,
just don't get it.
If you remove this from the movie and you have him be Han Solo from the beginning, this movie gets better by about 15%. I think.
Yeah. I think lore wise,
I just think as a story decision, I just don't think it's
yeah, it's a small moment, but it just
I know Jacob and I
doesn't work. It's just
talked about ad hominem about how much we don't like the film, and we had our fun with it. Not ad hominem, ad infinitum.
Ad nauseum.
Ad nauseum.
Oh,
there we go.
Yeah, we've talked about this extensively. Maybe not on the show, but
we've talked about it on the show too.
We've made it clear how we feel.
About
this moment, I think, and that's enough.
Yeah, it like if I could, there are 3 decisions in this film. If I could take them out, I would do it in a heartbeat, and the film would be so much better for it. 2 of them actually happen in this chunk right here. This is the first one. And this is, I think, probably the most consequential of the 3 of them, honestly. If I could pick any 3 of them to go, like any one of the 3 of them, I think I'd pick this one, honestly. More than Maul. I think I'd pick this one. Just because it's some guy. His name is Drod Munbrin. What the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
Good luck, Han Solo. We'll have you flying in no time. By the way, I know
who are your people? Who says that? Like that just hits the nail on the head a bit too much,
Yeah,
we get it. You don't have to make it that obvious what's happening here.
Yeah.
You can trust the audience a little bit, just a little bit.
I will say, good luck, Han Solo. We'll have you flying in no time. Cuts to Han flying through the air on Minbin. Fucking hilarious. I love it.
Yeah, I will say I do like this moment a lot.
It's so goofy, but like it's also like it's so goofy and also tragic at the same time. Like it's so funny to me. And like there was going to be a scene where Han was kicked out of the Imperial Academy for having a mind of his own, like he says later in the film. Like there was actually going to be a scene of that. Fuck that. It was cut for a good reason, frankly. This cut is so much funnier. This cut is infinitely funnier.
Yeah, I think that on a deeper level, it's a great nod how militaries often function, by taking on people with no other options, in a sometimes pretty exploitative and predatory way.
Absolutely. We'll see in other Star Wars stuff going on. The Empire knows very well, it does a very good job at taking advantage of these young people, often young men, and often in our society, and in Star Wars too, but to a lesser extent, because it doesn't seem this matters as much in the Star Wars galaxy, but in our world, young white men, and radicalizing them to the point of fascism. That's what they try to get Han to do, but Han's, Han, so he doesn't do that. But it was where Luke was going if Obi-Wan hadn't intervened in A New Hope. It's what happened to Cyril Karn in Andor. that is the story that the radicalized, lonely young white man, or not young, because we found out actually recently. Some of the pages of the new Dawn of the Rebellion visual dictionary came out. We found out, and this is crazy to me, and I'm still getting over this one. That you know how old Cyril Karn is in the events of Andor?
How old?
35. That's not a joke. He's 35 during the events of Andor.
Wow. Rising
It's
star.
really strange. I really thought he was younger than that. Again, I'm not mad about it or anything. I'm just so shocked. I really thought he was like late 20s at most.
Yeah.
In Andor. But yeah, no, this is what fascism does. It is yeah, especially in our own world, like lonely young white men. It radicalizes them. It takes their worst fears about being replaced by another, usually a minority of some sort, and it turns them violently against them. Like, this is how fascism works.
I mean, I don't know if that's directly applicable to Han in this case. You know, he's clearly just doing it as a means. He's doing it as a means to escape, and I think in general, it's not necessarily the inference that we make from the military.
Yeah,
operating
but like
as it does in the U.S., for instance.
Han's an interesting case because I don't think he was really using it as a means, but I'm sure there are a lot of people who used the Empire as a means to an end, and then got indoctrinated, and then drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah,
like
I mean, sure,
but like,
yeah, definitely, yeah.
It's not hard to see other people doing it.
Yeah, no, I suppose not. Yeah.
By the way, pulling Mimbin from Legends, like Mimbin, which was introduced, by the way, as Circarpus 5, I believe.
Yeah, it was. That's right.
Splinter of the Mind's Eye by Alan Dean Foster from 1978, and bringing it into canon and solo Star Wars movie story. Like, what the hell? That's an A+ pull.
Yeah.
Kasdan's store group, whoever did that, hats off to you guys. Like, truly good move, truly great pull. Yeah. I will also just add to the fascism stuff before by saying the fact that one of the best looks at imperial fascism and the brutalities of war in a Star Wars film is Solo, a Star Wars story, will never not be funny to me.
I don't know if I call it one of the best looks. It's definitely not the main focus, the way it is in Andor, for instance. But
in a Star Wars movie,
yeah,
in a Star Wars movie, I'm not talking about the shows, because I agree it would be Andor, in the shows, and Bad Batch, I'd say. But in the movies, it's this and Rogue One. It's the best look at the oppression of the Empire.
Yeah.
Like that it's Solo
ways, yeah.
of all things. It's really crazy.
Yeah. Thoughts on Beckett meeting the crew? My first thought when I saw the scene where Han sees Beckett and Beckett's going crazy is, why is this idiot spinning his gun so much for no reason? I think there's a thin line between coolness and going too far. And I think this scene just about does it for me.
I will say that I like Beckett as a character. I think I liked him a bit more before I learned what an asshole Woody Harrelson is.
Is he an asshole? What did he do?
He's supporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for president in 2024.
Oh, so he's a nut job.
Yeah, he's a nut job. Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't really change how I feel about his character. I think as a character, I think Beckett certainly has his charms, but
it only feels that way to me because it feels like Beckett to me, and I think a lot of people feel this way, is Woody Harrelson in Star Wars.
Yeah, to some extent, absolutely.
There's not it feels like Woody Harrelson is kind of just playing himself as a Star Wars character.
Yeah, a bit, yeah.
Yeah, no, he's a nut job. But I will say that Harrelson does work exceptionally well with Tandy Newton and Jon Favreau as a crew. Like, that crew dynamic shouldn't work, but it does.
Yeah.
By the way, can we pause for a second and talk about how Jon Favreau is in this movie?
Rio Durand, baby. I can't see Rio without thinking about Grease.
He's actually I did think about this.
I
when
know
writing
he's
those.
not even the same species.
He's
But the
remarkably
similarities are
similar. He's remarkably similar to Grease.
tiny four-armed pilot with a very certain kind of disposition and way of talking.
Just
Like, come
one
on.
was voiced by the guy who did Iron Man and the
No
Mandalorian, and one wasn't. So
and no disrespect to John Favreau whatsoever, but we know who the cooler Daniel is.
oh
So
yeah, I mean, like,
put it in an old meme
well,
for
hold
you.
on, okay. I'll just say this. Friend of the show, I know friend of the show, Trey Mitchell from Skywalker Through the League loves Rio. Rio is one of his favorite characters. And I know that man is devious ways, so I don't want him to come after us. So I just want to put it out that I love Rio. I think that the way that Jon Favreau says Wookiee is fantastic.
Yeah.
And
Rio's fine. No complaints there. Yeah.
But yeah. No, but we'll talk about Tandy Newton and Val later. But here's one of my favorite lines, and I love this line because it's lines like these, and I have a soft spot for any line that is like a throwaway line, but actually means something crazy when you think about it. Mission is to restore order and bring the emperor, enforce the emperor's will on this world, and eradicate the hostiles. It's their planet. We're the hostiles. Yeah. I'm like, is this a commentary on colonialism in Solo, a Star Wars story?
It sure is.
I mean, I dig it, but like, I was not expecting that.
Also, how the hell is he not just led off into prison directly after that scene? Like, he has so much attitude and just blatantly gets away with like giving like crazy shit to people who should just like throw him to the wolves for that. Between this and Proxima, it's pretty hilarious.
Yeah,
like, that's just who Han is. You know, he's a
Han can talk away out of anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, is he can yeah. Speaking of a line that I talked about earlier, it got so much like I feel like this is a phenomenon where when lines get featured so much in the trailer and then you actually see them in the movie, like they kind of lose a little bit of their meaning just so because you're so accustomed to hearing them. And that definitely happened with this line. I got kicked out of the Imperial Academy for having a mind of my own. Like I just love that line. It's so quintessentially Han Solo. Yeah. Do you have anything about this part of Minbin before we get into the literal den of the beast?
No, let's meet Chewie. Let's do it.
The first time I watched this, I was genuinely wondering what the beast was going to be, even though it was like incredibly telegraphed what it was going to be. Like, come on, what else could it have been other than Chewie? Like, it's such a like. Again, it's one of those things. And Solo does this a little bit. There are other Star Wars that I think that does do it better than Solo, but it's one of those things that shouldn't work but does.
Absolutely.
Like this is such a cheesy, campy way to put, like shoehorned way to put Chewie in, but it works. And it's like and like the whole thing of like Han and Chewie fake fighting, because Han spoke a little bit of Shriwook and got through to Chewie, and pulling a like one of the biggest W's he's ever had out of what should have been
movie.
out of what should have been his death, out of what should have been him dying, is so incredibly Han. Like again, I think they get the characterization of Han Solo to the letter in this movie. I'm like incredibly impressed with how they got Han Solo in this movie. With Alden's acting, with Lawrence and John's writing. It's great. I love it. It's great. I think they really did a great job of that. Do you have anything else about the Minbin sequence?
No. You know, they escape, you know, not much to say here for me, to be honest.
I'll just
You
say
know.
that the shower scene is fun, and I'm glad they kept that in there. I thought it was a
Yeah.
fun visual thing.
Yeah.
And
Silly movie.
and yeah. What was I gonna say? We talked about the fireplace scene a little bit. I'll just say that tell us about the girl Han. Is she nice? Does she have sharp teeth? Is a fantastic move. Is a fantastic line.
It
Is
is.
a fantastic line. Um, Jacob, you know what time it is?
What time is it, Eli?
It's time to get to the third train sequence in a row on Star Wars and Galaxy.
Oh, here we go. The Vandor.
Bad
The
Batch
Vandor incident.
Season 2, Bad Batch Season 2, Jedi Fallen Order, and Solo. All three in a row chronologically, all three of train sequences. And then they just go away after this.
Turns out trains are cool.
In this time period of Star Wars, yes, apparently, yes. I love the train heist. I think it's so interesting. Um, I I think it was a great idea for a heist, and I think they pulled it off exceptionally well.
Yeah, I kind of disagree. I think it was cool, obviously. It was very cool. It was very creative, it was well executed in many ways. But once again, I just felt like, obviously, I think everyone involved behind the scenes, they really showed off their visual, creativity, their choreographing chops, the visual effects, of course. But to me, it just didn't feel like it just didn't have a whole lot of weight to me. I don't know. I can't really put my finger on it. It just didn't do it for me for whatever reason. Now, maybe that was within the context of this movie, just kind of missing the mark in a few ways for me. But it was a nice scene in isolation, but I don't know. It didn't have enough substance for me, to be honest.
And that's fair. I will say that one thing I'm gonna take this moment to address our good friend of the show, Jared the Dark Jedi. Jared, I remember that time that Rio talked about opening a cantina somewhere warm but not too warm. You see, Jared and I played a trivia match together before against each other before EC was founded, and I beat him on that question. And I want Jared to know that I remember, and I will always remember, that I beat you on that question. Anyway, okay, let's go. Uh, Here's my real question for this: how the absolute fuck, since Solo, have we not seen, or at least an abundance of? I'm gonna check Wikipedia, and yeah, like other than a comic issue, how the fuck haven't we seen more of Enfys Nest? What a great character! Like, I forgot how well Erin Kellerman plays her, and how well, like, how great that design is in that movie, and how interesting the Cloud Riders are. Basically, being the proto Nile, but actually good.
They definitely want to make you know more. I will say that.
Like, how have we not seen more Enfys Nest? Enfys Nest is probably, I think, the most interesting character in this movie. New character in this movie. Sorry, Kira.
It could be said.
Um, uh, yeah. Do you have anything else to say about any of Solo before I get to the last point, that I have, which is unfortunately has to end on a negative note?
I mean, this does definitely end in a bad place for our heroes, I think it definitely does a good for everything I said about the movie, and I think it's tone narrative issues. I do think it does a good job of giving us that feeling of, really buying into, oh fuck, everything is going wrong.
Yeah.
Everything's spinning out. We're losing Val, we're losing Rio. Shit kind of sucks right now.
Yeah.
And it does a reasonably good job of being convincing in that, and kind of putting the brakes on the super happy fun adventure time vibe that it kept kind of switching back into so quickly after the first couple of real heavy moments of the story. So to Solo's credit, it does that. I think
I
Val's death again is a little questionable, just because of, it does feel like it's just rushed through a little bit.
so my
Not her
last
death
point about
necessarily,
this
but his reaction,
my
Beckett's reaction to it.
my
That's
last
all I have to
point
say.
is about Solo, and this is one of the other two of the three things that if I could delete from Solo, I would. It's been a ride, babe. I wouldn't trade it for anything. There's been a lot of
You don't like that?
criticism. There's been a lot of criticism online and from critics in general about the moment where they kill off Val, because especially like the marketing, I think a lot, and like just generally the movie in general presented Val to be a more major character than she actually was, and the fact that it was one of the first major leading Black women in Star Wars. And to
Yeah.
defend that and defend Solo against that, I have absolutely nothing. I agree with that completely. I think that Val shouldn't have died.
Yeah, that didn't really, I will admit that didn't occur to me at all, but I can understand how that feels very problematic, and how
Yeah.
that
And I
I
think
can
John
understand how that
Kasdan
would
is
feel
even
really bad.
I think John Kasdan even said it himself, honestly. I think he's like, yeah, we made a mistake by killing Val.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
think
I
she was a
think,
very interesting character, and I think that Tandy Newton did a great job playing her, and she shouldn't have died.
yeah. And I think even that, her kind of, what her death sets in motion, the dynamic of you know, the mistrust, the rancor, the anger of Beckett kind of saying this shit's, looking at Han and saying this shit's your fault. You got my girlfriend killed. That could have been accomplished still, while giving Val a much bigger, more interesting, more important role, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and having that happen much later in the movie. That being said, I don't think that they got that much out of her in the first place.
Yeah, and
But
and
it
is it
is,
about misleading? Is it about misleading marketing as much as it is about story? Yes, absolutely, and I'm not defending that. But
yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It's crummy.
it's
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 crummy.
it's it's a bad precedent, and of course, Star Wars has had a very rocky history of the way they've treated non-white male characters,
Yeah,
um, and
that is true.
non-white straight male characters, and I always want Lucasfilm to do better, in terms of that, and I'm sure, of course, I'm a white guy. I shouldn't be the one leading this conversation, absolutely not, but I think it's important to bring up, and I think that it is, and I'm annoyed that Solo had to go this way. I'm greatly annoyed that Solo had to go this way. It's one of those. It's one of the three things with this movie. It's Han Solo, it's Val's death, and it's the ending thing that
Yeah,
just take it down. Like everything else, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty okay about. I'm pretty
it's a
good about it.
self-inflicted L for sure.
And yeah, um, yeah. Uh, what are your overall thoughts on the first 40 minutes of Solo?
Overall, I think it's a fun movie in many ways. I think it suffers from, like I said, kind of narrative and tonal whiplash, maybe a certain lack of identity to a certain extent, or a difficulty figuring out exactly how to tell this story. Maybe a lack of storytelling discipline is what I'm trying to say. That being said, though, it has a lot of bright spots. I think I really enjoyed everything on Corellia much more than I did the Vandor sequences. Um, but I'm very much looking forward to the introduction of Lando Calrissian coming up, and I'm very much looking forward to continue to unpack what is doubtlessly one of the most interesting Star Wars projects of recent years.
Unsurprisingly to everybody who listens to the show, my opinion is more positives than Jacob's. I think that for me, the real things that this section, I think this section is honestly the roughest part of Solo. With the Han Solo name sequence and the death of Val, like those two things are just don't work for me at all. Everything else though is pretty good. This is not a Star Wars movie subject matter wise that is made for a fan like me. And I totally get that. And I'm totally fine with that. Like, we don't see a single lightsaber in this movie until the last 2 minutes. And I'm not somebody who's as interested in the underworld stuff. But that being said, for what it's trying to do, I think it does a pretty good job of doing. For what
I do also
Solo,
remember. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
For what Solo's trying to do, trying to set up this origin story for one of the most iconic characters in the franchise, I think it does its job pretty well, actually. I think like there's stuff like is hey, I'm gonna call you Chewie because I definitely can't say Chewbacca every time. Is that a bit ham-fisted? Sure, but I think it's earned it. Like I think it's like I think that kind of stuff's expected for this book, and I think that it takes enough interesting risks and it does enough interesting things with its narrative to offset the fact, at least a little bit, that there are some choices made, at least in this first part, that I just can't. I just really can't with. Again, Han Solo, the name origin we've talked our ear off. We talked each other's ears off about how much we both don't like that. Val's death is something that, again, I'm sure that there's a lot of white male privilege to this, but like, Jacob, I was with you. I didn't realize how damaging that was to Black women until like shockingly late after I watched that movie. Until I heard the opinions of a lot of Black women in fandom, just general women in fandom, who found that moment very demoralizing. And I completely understand that, and I agree with them.
Perfect
What are you gonna
example
say?
of why I was just gonna say I do for the record, I do remember you giving Solo a standing ovation when we saw it in the theaters. So opinions do change.
And I think it's actually like it's interesting because I think actually the Solo is actually um an interesting case for In a Galaxy where I think the highs are getting higher for me, but the lows are becoming lower.
I would say the same thing. I think there's a lot of things that I was pretty lukewarm on or didn't appreciate the first time I watched this movie. Alden's acting, the general campiness of parts of it that I now find quite delightful. And there's other parts that I was just kind of meh on originally, some of these extended action sequences, just the way that they set up the story that now I find quite irritating. So I'm with you there. I'm with you there.
Yeah, I think that I think that that like a lot of Star Wars projects, I often find a lot of the like I don't think Star Wars has a great track record. I mean, there are obvious exceptions, of course, with openings. I think it does endings extremely well, and I think it does openings less well. Generally speaking, again, there are exceptions. New Hope is a fantastic example. Force Awakens. Let's see, what are other examples? Bad Batch.
Yeah, there's out
Uh,
there. Yeah.
but so I think it's gonna. I think I like this movie better as it goes on. But let's talk about next week. Actually, episode 117 of Star Wars in the Galaxy. because we're not going to be doing this alone. Because yeah, we have a guest next episode. We have somebody who I know is a very big fan of this movie, probably more than both of us. Good friend of the show, good friend of mine in the Star Wars space. Buck O'Brien is coming on the show next week. It'll be Jacob, Buck, and myself, and we'll be talking about the next 40 minutes of Solo, from 40 minutes to an hour 20, covering stuff on Vandor, and I'm sure also Kessel. Um, uh, and I'm excited to do that. In the meantime, you can listen to us on everywhere you listen to podcasts. If we're not on there for some reason, you can email us about that or any other thing. slvinagalaxy@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter and Threads and Instagram and everywhere in the Galaxy Pod. You can follow up my personal stuff, linktr.ee/_OGFan327. Go watch Epic Confrontations on YouTube, youtube.com/Star Wars in a Galaxy. And I think until next time, may the Force be with you
Always.